Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Kyle Hinterberg. He is a manager at LBMC in their PCI group. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you very much, Pete. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being here as well. Could you give our audience a little background on you and your career thus far?
Sure thing. Yeah, I started out kind of as a system administrator, just doing, IT stuff. Kind of fell into PCI because the company I worked at, one year our acquirer came to us and said, "Hey, you guys got to start doing PCI right." And so I was kind of the junior guy. I volunteered to go become an ISA, an internal security assessor. That was kind of my entryway into PCI as a whole. I stayed as an ISA there, moved to another company as an ISA, kind of, running, PCI kind of a little bit more globally there, but then eventually switched to the other side of the table, moved to being a QSA. I've been a QSA for, I think, about 6 years now. About 3 years ago, I came to LBMC, and that's where I've been, doing PCI work and loving it.
Awesome. Well, great to hear. And obviously know quite a few folks there at LBMC. I guess, do you think the talent gap is real in security? Well, I guess for the purposes of this conversation, maybe we can narrow it down a little bit. Would you say the talent gap in GRC is real, and maybe specifically within PCI?
I would say the talent gap is, it depends on what your perspective is and how you look at it. I think that it can be seen as real, but a lot of it tends to be, again, the perspective people have. A lot of people, specifically with like GRC and PCI, kind of in a way believe it that it's like an entry level, position or something like that. Like, hey, I just got out of school. How do I get into PCI? That's something that I hear a lot. And the answer is, you're probably not. You can't just jump out of school into PCI. And so, and then on the flip side, you have, manager positions or above people that are looking to hire people out of school and thinking, we can put them into PCI or, other similar GRC fields, even at an organization within a GRC, within an internal, security organization, you have your GRC folks. And I feel like sometimes it's thought of that they are, not to pick on them since I'm in them myself, lesser or like not as, experienced or knowledgeable as the quote unquote security team, maybe the red team or whatever. But the truth is that they require a lot of knowledge and, a lot of understanding to do that. And so I think that, again, the biggest issue is the perspectives that, hey, I just got out of school. I can't find a job. I'm applying to all these positions, but they require a lot more knowledge and experience than I technically have. And then on the flip side, I'm an HR person trying to fill this, GRC role, and I'm trying to hire these people, but I can't find anyone who's fresh out of school but has a CISSP. And so I think that's the big issue, and people need to some degree, change their sights a little bit and understand, like, if I want to get into a GRC field, I'm probably not going to just instantly go jump into, being, a GRC senior analyst type of a position. You might have to go work in a SOC or maybe even get a job just in IT, start out, working through understanding what IT is before you can jump over to the GRC or more security side. That's really, I think, my take on it, that while I do believe there likely is a gap in a sense, a lot of it is around missed perspectives, and people need to reset on that and understand, the different ways you can flow into your future role. Again, looking like, this is where I want to be in 5 years, back that up and figure out what you have to do to get there.
Yeah, my experience in PCI specifically, having worked with a handful of QSA companies at this point in my career, there seems to be kind of a growing gap in both terms of experience as well as salary between the folks that are coming through the AQSA programs and the people that have been doing PCI since its inception. So you have like this group of super, super senior QSAs, and then you have some super junior people, and there's very few people in the middle. But it seems, I don't know if it's for salary reasons or what, everybody wants to hire the people in the middle, and there's just not as many of those people.
Yeah, so. I totally get that. Yeah, if you've been around for PCI since the beginning, in a sense, or been doing it forever, odds are, you've, been promoted up and through to the point where you could, potentially lead a PCI team or something. And, most teams only need one of those folks on them. But at the same time, when you get the more junior folks, AQSA specifically, they need, to have some help, and even just with the AQSA program, you need to have QSA mentors. They need to be doing, a bit of overhead to make sure that everything is going on. And so, yeah, it's that middle, that, kind of 5 years experience is really, I feel like, the butter zone. But that's, to a degree, that the hardest folks to find, that have really, have that good knowledge and experience, but yet they're not going to break your pocketbook or want to, run your team once you hire them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it seems too that just from what I'm hearing in the industry, that there's, I suppose automation is having some effect on this, but there's been kind of a race to the bottom, and this is not unique to PCI. It seems that it's ubiquitous across SOC 2, ISO, PCI, high trust, whatever. All the audits and assessments and compliance frameworks out there and standards. Companies are looking for ways to get their audits done quicker and cheaper, and especially the smaller companies like small SaaS companies. They just need to get that checkbox and move on to the next thing. And just so that they can, sell their product to their clients. Ultimately, that's all they really care about. It's not so much the security of the product or, their team. So I guess my experience has been that that's leading to, from what I'm hearing, reduced fees for reports and audits, which has led to this crunch where companies aren't willing or able to pay for the more senior folks. Yet they want that level of experience. What do you think the solution to that is?
The difficult thing there is, just like you said, there's a bunch of organizations that are, it's the whole saying of check the box, and that's all they're trying to do. They just need to check the box. They need to have their attestation so they can give that to whoever they need to give it to so they can keep doing business. And in that case, a lot of times no one is really reading that or trying to, understand it. And, like you were saying, QSAs, QSA companies, we're not all equal. There are some organizations that try to do things a little bit quicker. And then there's some organizations, kind of like LBMC, where we try to do more of the partnership approach and work with our clients and be more of a partner with them than just someone who's going to give them a piece of paper and then forget about them for 9 months. But that's the difficult part. Is I feel like it's trying to find client base that can support that, and that's really, I feel like, what we've been doing here at LBMC is focusing on the correct client base that can support the kind of team you want to have, versus trying to just find anyone who wants an AOC as fast as possible. I've heard supposed horror stories of organizations that can give you an AOC in 2 weeks, which we all know that's completely bogus. Most organizations can't even, especially now with 4.0, write a report in 2 weeks and get it through QA. So how that could ever happen is completely beyond me. But I think that's the part of the problem there, and part of that, I think, is up to us, the QSAs, other consultants, trying to make sure we're educating our clients and just the kind of the cybersecurity, culture as a whole across the world, in a sense, to make sure they realize that we are actually doing a service that's worthwhile, and that we're not just coming in there. Again, this is outside of just PCI. It could be a SOC audit, anything like that. We're not coming in there to try to find gotchas, really, or to try to just give you your piece of paper. The real goal should be to try to make sure you're secure. You're secure for yourself, for your organization, for your employees, for your customers, and drill that into their mind a little bit better than just, here's your piece of paper that says you can keep doing business. But you always run into the issue of, does it help you sell more widgets? That's I know the problem that a lot of security teams have across the board. They might want to hire, maybe a little bit higher end, more of a bit of a white glove approach, in a sense, consulting agency to help them out with stuff. But at the same time, their management might come back and say, is that going to help us sell more widgets? Right now, all we care about is widgets. And, then you have the argument of, a breach is going to happen. But I feel like a few years ago, there was the argument to be had that, if we get breached, we're going to get all this money. And, the management's finally going to care about security. But more and more, I feel like breaches happen so often that it's becoming a little bit, just the normal business. And so an organization gets breached in 3 months, they forget about it and they just keep moving on business as usual. And I feel like I kind of rambled a lot there, Pete. So I don't know if that kind of answered your question or if I was just kind of going off on my own, pet peeves.
No, that's great. Actually, I've been hearing a lot of the same things. It's like, well, breaches don't seem to necessarily carry the same weight as they used to. And if that's the case, then you can't really you can't sell building more comprehensive security around that. Because if people don't care about the consequences, it doesn't matter, that you're saying, well, we can prevent the consequences. I mean, of course, all boards are going to care somewhat about a breach, but the question is how much, and how much are they willing to essentially pay to prevent those breaches. And I think that's what a lot of CISOs these days are struggling with. They're struggling with making that case. And that's why, especially when, times are, economy's not great or times are lean, and CISOs are having a hard time getting budget and headcount because the boards are basically saying, we're just going to take that risk, or we're going to try and transfer that risk, because it's a potential future unknown. It's not a guarantee by any means. And there's a chance we could get away with not paying anything for however long. So they're just not willing to make that investment. I mean, as somebody who's on the consulting side yourself, is there anything you're able to do to help your clients, security leaders on the internal side, make that case to the executive teams and the boards?
Yeah, that's something I do quite a bit, is trying to educate, and help them, give them what, in a sense, ammunition I can of, this is why it really matters. Here's evidence as to why, obviously it's something, pulling from, the news and, trying to educate them on what breaches are happening and how they are still a big deal. But then also just talking through the general security that you can get by being compliant and how that's going to help you out and, just save so much time and hassle. To me, I feel like that's almost becoming better than, talking about like brand loss, because I feel like there's very little brand loss anymore. You hear about, organization XYZ got breached. Odds are you're still going to go shop there tomorrow. There's very few people that really are, stopping their shopping anymore due to, a breach or anything like that. And there isn't as much direct financial loss as there maybe used to be. To me, the biggest thing is just the time and hassle it takes to come up and get back and going, doing that, running through like a business continuity tabletop, and figuring out how long is it actually going to be before you can get up and running. Yeah, maybe you'll still be in business and still be able to accept payments or, kind of stumble forward, but how long, how many of your efforts that you're trying to roll out in the next 12 months are going to be pushed to the next 24 months? You're likely going to have a 3 to 6 month period where you're just doing nothing but getting back up and going. And that to me is the most likely the biggest hurt to most organizations now, is kind of that period of downtime where they can't do anything. And after that, odds are during and throughout it, you're going to be losing some of your best employees. So that's another part that I think is important to bring into it, understanding that retention and that downtime that's going to happen to come up and through it is more important than, emphasizing brand loss.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of what you were talking about there sounds like you're essentially trying to uncover pain or potential future pain, which strikes me actually as a sales tactic. It's what a lot of salespeople use in closing new business. They're uncovering pain, and then they're basically selling to that pain. Here's how we can eliminate that pain for you. What about but that always makes me think of the term FUD. I understand that there's a reason why we use that as an industry. And I think it's because as humans, we respond to negative stimuli. We're pain avoidant. We're always trying to get away from the pain or the potential destruction of something. But is there a way to, as you mentioned before, kind of help businesses realize that through security, they're able to sell more widgets? Like, is that ever a conversation that you have?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That, showing security as a way that you can improve and make stuff easier. Like just an easy, for instance, right now that's going on is one of the big requirements that PCI has, had forever, and they're only making it more, kind of all over the place is MFA. You need MFA when you're signing into anything to do with cardholder data in any way, shape, or form is basically the way they're moving to. And so generally speaking, MFA is, it can be a little bit of a pain. You got to pull up your phone, you got to type in some numbers, all of that kind of stuff. It increases the login times. But now there's new, capabilities rolling out like Windows Hello. And so you can use Windows Hello, get you, the MFA type prompt, ensuring you are who you say you are, kind of meeting those requirements and actually saving time. And so there are, times when you can roll out, new security that's actually improving your security while also saving time and allowing you to sell more. So I think there are absolutely ways that you can marry security with productivity to be able to move faster. And that's, to me, it's one of those things like I know a saying that probably a lot of people have heard, but it's the old saying of, why do cars have brakes? And the whole reason that cars have brakes isn't to slow down, it's so they can go faster. If you didn't have brakes in your car, you could still drive. You would just probably go a lot slower, slow enough you might be able to Fred Flintstone it a little bit and drag your feet. But with brakes, you can go hit 60 and you can still stop. And that's the whole idea with security is, we're not here to slow you down. We're here to let you go faster. But then if you need to slow down, if you need to fix something, we can do that.
That's great. I love that analogy. Absolutely. Well, you had kind of mentioned earlier too about how sometimes it's difficult to get people to the point where they can really be a contributing member of, say, a PCI practice if you're a consulting firm or an internal GRC analyst or something like that. If folks are needing to go and be productive members of society in an IT role or something first, how do we generate better pipelines in GRC to get more people into the field? And the reason I ask is because, as I'd mentioned before, I don't think there's enough QSA companies, for instance, actually leaning into the AQSA programs. There's only a handful of them that I've seen, or a few that really have like where they're cranking out AQSAs, and not many are. So how can we get companies to lean more into that strategy of building more of these professionals that we all know that we're going to need in 5-10 years?
I feel like specifically when you're talking about PCI and QSAs and AQSAs, part of the issue is QSAs ourselves. We need to get better at working, with a team of AQSAs to help us out. I know a lot of QSAs, and a lot of us like to, basically take an assessment and kind of own it a little bit. And this is, my baby. I'm going to do everything. And, it's something I feel like everyone struggles with delegation and trying to figure out how to successfully leverage an AQSA who can come on and help you, give them some of it, you still take some of it and work through that together. And I know a lot of people, and to some degree rightfully so, feel like when they try to do that, they end up taking more time than if they would just do it themselves. And so then you start doing that. It's like, oh, I'm just going to do this myself. And then you never bother to go down that path of, getting, more junior folks to help you out. Whereas if you make it through that initial hurdle, you kind of work through some of that pain in the beginning, get someone who's been through a few assessments, and then you get to a good place where you can actually hand off portions of an assessment and work through it with them. So I feel like that's the big thing of trying to understand that initial pain is going to go away, and that eventually you're going to be helping yourself out by having, ideally less work. But you're also going to help those individuals out by letting them come in and move onward and upward. Because otherwise, right now, like you were just saying earlier, it's all too often that most, QSA companies want someone who can already come in and write a rock. But that's just not the easiest thing to find. A lot of QSA companies don't want to lose the people they have that can write a rock. So yeah, I think that's the biggest one, is really understanding what an entry level role entails and how to make the most use out of that individual across the board. Again, it's even if you're, not a manager or whatever, but you're a QSA running an assessment, you have to understand how to leverage those AQSAs and bring them on and, meet them where they're at. So that way they can meet you and you can get to where you need to be.
Yeah, I can totally see what you're saying about how at the individual level, at the micro level, you end up spending a lot more time because you have to have this person basically shadowing you. You have to instruct them on how to do each and every little thing in the beginning. And yeah, it's going to take quite some time before they're up to the point where they're actually contributing value. I think that's a big problem with just training people and developing these pipelines of junior folks in general, is nobody wants to take the time today because they're already operationally saturated. They already have so much going on. They already have so many clients they're juggling, and it can be so difficult to lean into this sort of thing when you already have a full plate. I suppose my argument is not so much at the micro level, it's more at the macro level. Like, as an industry, we need more people flowing into these roles, or we're all going to be worse off. And like I said, 5-10 years. I mean, the people that started off doing PCI in the beginning, they're starting to retire. They're going to continue to retire. And I just don't see enough people being trained behind them. So what can we do, I guess, to help, QSA company leadership and just leadership and security in general to lean into the strategy of building their own versus, poaching the experienced QSA for top dollar?
Yeah, I totally get that. And I would say that the biggest thing is trying to make, a team structure where you can really leverage those junior staff. And I feel like kind of, what you were mentioning earlier on the whole side of automation, and AI, obviously we got to talk about that a little bit, but that's all coming into consulting work in general. And to some degree, you can look at it and say that, hey, we're going to have these AI bots that are, reading all these policies and looking at system configs or whatnot, taking care of some of that, kind of grunt work in a sense, a little bit, that we all have to do for an assessment that no one necessarily loves. And, again, AI might be able to be great at it. And you could say that that's going to take away from some of those entry level roles. But to me, I actually think that might be the perfect shot of where more entry level roles can, come in, have someone come in who's kind of being the, AI Sherpa in a sense, who's helping that AI understand what it's doing, reading through what it's reading through to make sure it's getting it all accurate, and kind of assisting then across the board, with a team, to help them be able to better leverage some of this technology and tools. And that can be a way to then, come into and eventually become a QSA or move onward and upward within that organization or another, but to have that chance to get, wide ranging experience with what, goes on within a GRC field. So I feel like that right now is one of the places where I see as a great option. And like, if you are, kind of an up and coming individual, basically take on AI, say that that's going to be a bit of your strength, and understand what it could do to help out a team and how you could, leverage that to help them out without even necessarily having all the knowledge yourself. That's where you can leverage that AI to have more of that knowledge, and you're just understanding what it can do. It's, obviously I feel like in the past few months, there hasn't been as much talk about, like the concept of prompt engineering and all of that. But I feel like that's exactly what, is going to be somewhat important to understand how to leverage those tools to, better utilize them across the board. And that's something that, right now, all the old people, out there in QSAville aren't really doing yet, or as well as they could. And so that's, one option that I see coming.
Yeah, and it would seem to me like in an ideal setup, if I were, say, a partner at one of these QSA companies and I wanted to future-proof my consulting team, I would want to build a program once where I was able to then filter people through over time, set up the training program once, get all the documentation, the processes, everything in place once. The problem is it takes, I think, a lot of investment on the front end, and nobody wants to make the investment on the front end. They want to figure it out as they go along and not invest too much at once.
We're all sailing in the boat we're building as we're going.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess this is my pitch. Like, I think I think companies need to lean into building these pipelines, build it once, and then reap the benefits forever, essentially. And if you're able to do that as a consulting firm, set up to where you have, say, one trainer, that their dedicated role, maybe it's a tenured QSA who's training all the AQSAs, make it benefit basically from the economies of scale. Like, don't just train one person at a time. train 5-10 people at a time, and have a specific structure to where each of them is going to get some individual attention, but then there will be some group activities and things like that. And then if you can use AI to kind of fill in the gaps of, obviously the trainer is only going to have so many hours in a day, but if they're able to basically set a direction for each of those individuals, turn them loose with the tools, and then have them report back after a period of time, and just plan all of this out. I feel like if you're able to plan it all out in the beginning, you reap the rewards forever. But as we discussed, that's both the time and a monetary investment. I feel like consulting firms have always kind of done things the same way for so long, and it's been so ingrained in the culture of the companies that, hey, this is just how we do things. We poach people from other firms. That's just how we do it. We gotta hire somebody who can quote unquote hit the ground running, and they need to understand the pace of consulting and all these other things. I tend to favor the idea that these things can be taught. If you find somebody that has the right level of intelligence, I think that's a really important thing. The right motivators, again, super important thing. Maybe a little bit harder to assess, but just as important as IQ or Q, technically, I think in psychological terms, is the intelligence metric that they use. I guess in your experience, what traits make up a successful consultant, or somebody in your profession that you might be looking for, say, if you were to hire somebody?
If I had to boil like my preference down to one specific thing, I think the best thing for a consultant to have is curiosity. That's what I really think comes into it. Obviously, you need to have the like you're saying, intelligence. All the things that are expected. Soft skills. You have to obviously something I think a lot of people don't realize is that when you're a consultant, it's at least 50%, if not more, soft skills and, working with clients and talking to them versus the hard skills of actually understanding how to configure systems and read, firewall rules and all of that. But that's that, the soft skills are really important. But again, to me, what really makes a great consultant from an okay consultant is the ones that are curious. They dig into stuff, even if thinking back to the idea of being like a junior guy on a team. If you're just, kind of doing what you need to do, hitting your buttons, running your tools, putting your outputs out, and that's it, odds are you might stay at that position for a long time. But if you're really curious and you're digging into it and you're going above and beyond, that's the person who's going to jump up and, roll faster, is driving that curiosity, moving forward. And that's also going to be the person who's, working with clients, digging into stuff, figuring out what's going on. So to me, that's the number one trait that I like to see in anyone, is curiosity.
Yeah, and it seems like some other guests I've talked to recently have mentioned analytical. Just being analytical is a very important trait. And it seems to me that curiosity and analytical ability, or propensity to be analytical, those are two things that kind of go hand in hand. If you're curious about the why behind something, you automatically kind of want to analyze that thing, break it down into its component parts and understand it more. Is there any way to suss out that sort of thing when you're interviewing somebody? Is it like a gut feeling, or is it something that you could write down on paper?
To some degree, it's a gut feeling, and I feel like it's hard, and that's one of the really difficult ones. It's like the whole thing of trying to hire people with culture fit. It's, you can kind of guess it, you can kind of feel it, but you never really know until you have someone on staff to some degree. So I think that is difficult. To me, the best thing to do as far as analytical capability, curiosity, even culture fit, is from an interviewer perspective to make sure not just to ask yes or no questions. Really try to get interviewees to explain how they went through a process. Hey, have you ever had an instance where you're trying to fix something and it just went totally awful, and everything went kind of foobar? How did you get through that? What happened? And have them explain their process, and ideally, in some of those types of instances, you can have them talk through and explain, were they curious, were they analytical, how did they approach that problem, or did they just throw their hands up in the air and have someone else come fix it for them, or did they just despair and not do anything, or whatnot. But trying to have them talk through scenarios is really the best way I know of to try to get that through in an interview.
Yeah, for sure. Scenario-based questions, open-ended questions, asking follow-up questions, kind of like we do on the podcast, where it's really more of a conversation. I feel like that's how a good interview should be as well. It should not be a Q&A interrogation. It should be a two-way conversation. Both parties are in it to figure out if there's a fit or not. It's not just a one-way decision. It's a two-way decision. And the best hiring managers I've worked with over the years, they're the ones that understand that. They also tend to be kind of servant leader types in my experience, where, they realize that we're all just people. And though my title may be above yours in the organizational hierarchy, it doesn't mean that I'm worth more than you, as a person or, as an individual.
100%.
For sure. Yeah. Any thoughts on how we can, I guess, improve hiring in the field in general, given some of the, issues that we've talked about previously, where consulting firms, for instance, always have kind of hired the same way. Maybe we're not training as much juniors as we'd like. And I think a lot of companies, like you'd mentioned, have sort of suboptimal hiring processes, and sometimes it can kind of take months, for instance, to hire somebody. Any thoughts on how we can improve the hiring processes out there?
I feel like one of the biggest things that should be done across the board is to look at like all of the descriptions and requirements for any given job, because I feel like at best, most people that end up getting a job maybe, align with 60% of them, but yet organizations still feel they need to have all these different requirements for, bachelor's degrees or all these different certifications and whatnot. And, like we were just talking through, the big deciding point in whether you have a good employee is not what hard skills they are coming on with. It's not all of that. It's really, what are their personality traits? What are their, core beliefs? Those are the things that we should be worrying about a little bit more, and understanding that, just because they, maybe aren't coming directly from IT or something doesn't mean they can't be a great, IT employee or a great security employee. I've heard many cases where people have, come from, like art major backgrounds, or stories of people who are librarians who come in and then they're able to manipulate data and understand that really well. And so, making sure that we're looking at everyone who might be a possibility to bring into the field and not keeping our eyes so narrow. And it's even easy to understand that if you go back, 10, 20 years, the truth of the matter is cybersecurity is really a young technology. You go read a book and it's like, oh, look at this history of, cybersecurity being invented. It's like, oh, that happened in the 70s. That's in living memory. And so all of the first people who really got into cybersecurity, people that are still alive and working in cybersecurity today, they went through school and they went through training and all of that before there was even the term cybersecurity. So we shouldn't be looking at people who are just specifically in cybersecurity degrees, cyber roles, cyber certifications. Look everywhere at people and understand that it's more so, again, the mindset, the core beliefs. Those types of things are more important than just what hard skills you have. I can teach anyone how to read firewall rules. That's not that big of a deal. But are you curious? Are you analytical? Can you read through that and understand it? That has nothing to do with, have you done it in the past? It's, again, more your mentality, and can you, do that and not fall asleep.
Well, and then another one too that I would say is kind of an archaic, unwritten hiring rule is we'll only hire from direct competitors or other consulting firms if we're a consulting firm. And usually the feedback is if they don't come from consulting, they don't already understand the pace of consulting. You'll hear that even more with the consulting firms that really run people ragged, but it's all about pace. Or it may be, the culture of the company that they say that they'll understand better if they come from a consulting firm. Why do you think consulting firms will continue to only hire from other consulting firms? What do you think it boils
To
down?
me, I think that's a little bit of, essentially a little bit of laziness where then it's just easy. Again, back to the whole idea of you want to hire someone and just be able to toss them to the wolves and forget about them and let them go. But for me, if I had the choice between hiring two individuals who had essentially, the same resumes, same kind of experience, but one was working at a consulting field in a consulting role, and one was working internally at an organization doing GRC, I would take the one internally doing GRC. I think it's really important, for a consultant to have been consulted essentially, or, specifically, I love it, as an assessor, I have been assessed. I know what that feels like. And I know when I'm talking to my clients, I have that empathy and that connection with them. And I've had, comments both for myself and other assessors in the same role who have worked through assessments and been assessed. And now you're doing the assessment that you are able to grasp that and understand what they're going through a little bit better. And so you're able to communicate that. And again, it's more on the partnerships side. If your goal is just to spit out reports as fast as you possibly can, then I get why you might want people who are just consultants, driven from that consulting standpoint. But if you really want to help clients, help them through a situation, work with them, then it's better to be able to understand their perspective. It's the whole, walk a mile in their shoes. And so to me, I think that's important.
Yeah, fair enough. So it seems like you could almost draw the distinction between the hyper fast-paced firms and then the firms that take a little bit longer, do high quality job, that sort of thing. And then the ones that are more pace focused, they're going to be more apt to only hire people from other consulting firms. The ones that take a little bit more time, more of a partnership, more white glove approach, they're more likely to consider somebody from the internal side because it's more about quality and thoroughness. And I don't know if that's a word, thoroughness, but
yeah.
You know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that idea. That's again, it's not going to fall down, and I don't want people, assessors who've been assessors the whole life to, not agree with me. And I totally know assessors who, came out of college and have, moved into consulting roles, assessment roles, and they're awesome. I don't want to pick on them, but I just think generally speaking, it's an easy way to understand that. It's the same thing where, even way back when we were chatting about how to get into the GRC field, odds are the easy approach is to, to be a SOC analyst, to be, a help desk analyst, to, work in the IT field, to understand all those roles, because it gives you that empathy and understanding of what's going on to then move into security. And I think that's the same thing for, assessing, that, you get that understanding and empathy to then move and then look back at it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and I wanted to go back to your point from earlier about how on job descriptions, you'll often see all of these credentials. We default to a lot of acronyms in the security field. It seems like you got to have your CISA and CISP and QSA and ISO lead auditor and your bachelor's degree. But none of those things really describe how well somebody's going to do in a role. I think the reason those things end up on the job descriptions is there's something that can be assessed at a glance on a resume.
To me, it's kind of like the HR checklist.
Right. So how then, on the hiring side, say you're a security professional hiring manager, how do you partner with the HR folks, the internal recruiting folks, external recruiting folks to help them understand not just what's on that job description, those credentials or whatever it may be, but also the intangibles that you're looking for? How do you ensure that they're screening for those proper things?
I know two things that we do here at LBMC that I really appreciate from our, recruiting folks is one, going to colleges and universities, and that way you have the chance to directly talk to people, understand them. Again, it's more so trying to understand that mentality without worrying about, specifically what degree are you getting, what certifications are you picking up while you're going through college and whatnot. And then another thing they do for, people who are out in the field is kind of, in a sense, do a little bit of LinkedIn stalking, but, go and see for someone, what are they putting out on LinkedIn? What are they doing? And maybe not just LinkedIn alone, but, what else are they doing in the industry to try to understand, their knowledge, what they actually know how to do versus they just knew how to pass a test 5 years ago. So I think those are two things that, recruiters generally can do, but otherwise it does get to be, very difficult to say, hey, we want someone with a bachelor's in a CISSP or equivalent experience, and then to have them try to judge what that equivalent experience might be, or to walk through it. Sometimes, depending on the role and the requirements, it's something where some of those initial interviews might not be appropriate to have a recruiter or an HR representative essentially give the go no go, where maybe they're just doing some of those initial talk through interview. Maybe they're doing things like deciding if someone can't be hired due to some background check failing or something like that. But when it comes to anything based on the actual individual, the knowledge they have, all of that, leaving that up to the actual hiring manager to make those interviews and those decisions.
Yeah, I think the issue you run into potentially there is that you don't have recruiters on the front end screening enough people out. So you end up getting almost too many people.
Everyone.
Yeah, to the hiring manager stage. How can you avoid that in that scenario?
I think the best thing to do is to make sure that you're partnering well with your recruiters, and that they really understand your mindset and what you're looking for. And that's where I feel like it's very much recruiter focused. Ideally, you have a recruiter who like here at LBMC, we have numerous recruiters, but they tend to have focuses where they're just working with an individual set of, shareholders or managers. And so we have, someone who is specifically looking for cybersecurity folks, and, they then understand what they should be, asking about, what they should be looking for, to understand, how they're talking and working with our shareholders to, get the right fit. So I think that's really important. I feel like it's very similar to sales folks, that when you have a sales individual who's just going out there and calling up everyone and kind of rattling off whatever lingo without really understanding what's going on. That's the same thing when you have recruiters doing the same thing, that are just reaching out to everyone on LinkedIn, or talking to people without really understanding what is desired. That's the important thing. Is so a lot of it is on that recruiter to actually be educated if you expect them to kind of be able to offload some of the work of interviewing everyone. Otherwise, you might have to let them, let more people through, so that way you're not letting, the really good candidates slip through the cracks. Because again, I think it's important to try to diversify, what we're hiring and who we're hiring. It's something, when we think about diversity as a whole, a lot of times that tends to think about just the bigger things, like gender and whatnot, which is very important to try to diversify that. But it's also important to try to diversify backgrounds, and not just have every single person who came through the same, 5 universities and the same cybersecurity degree, and have them be running your, cybersecurity organization. You want people that have come from different, backgrounds, maybe people that aren't within cybersecurity and all of that. And so, yeah, I feel like it's a problem that I don't know if any of that is a direct solution, but there's hopefully we figure out some way through it.
Yeah. Well, and the more creative you get with the types of folks that you hire, the more intellectual diversity that you get. And, I'm a huge proponent of intellectual diversity. I'm thinking specifically of a CISO I know. She's very much an artsy person. She does theater on the weekends and stuff like that. That's not typically what you think of when you think of a CISO. You think of either more very buttoned up, technical, but not creative and artsy. So, but she brings a unique perspective to her organization because she is more, I don't know if it's left or right brain, but the more artsy half of your brain anyway. But yeah, there's value in that. And hiring people with English majors and stuff like that. Some of the most amazing professionals I've worked with over the years had completely unrelated degrees, or one gal, I think she was in like physical sports therapy, something like that. Now she's a security manager and doing extremely well. I talked to her on the podcast last year. So that keeping an open mind, I think, hiring from not just the same set of companies every time, and getting a little bit.
Sometimes it almost feels a little bit like the NFL or something like that, where you have, the teams and, all the players just kind of rotate through them. That doesn't, lend to long-term success, in my opinion. You need to have that, fresh thoughts, fresh mindsets coming into an organization.
For sure. Yeah, but that takes, I think, a specific focus and game plan, really. you're not going to default to doing that as all the consulting firms have always done. It's, again, we've always done it this way. This is just how the industry does it. We call people resources. That's just how it's done. We only hire from other consulting firms. That's just how it's done. So yeah, hopefully, listening to this podcast for some folks, it serves, I guess, as a reminder to, keep an open mind, partner closely with your recruiters. Like you said, you brought up a great point about how the more specialized the recruiter, the more you can lean on that recruiter, and the more time ultimately it's going to save you. Because if you can trust them to screen more people out in the beginning because they are more specialized, that's going to save you time from interviewing folks that, potentially wouldn't make it through that, first round if the recruiter knew what they were doing a little bit more. I think a lot of internal recruiters don't have the luxury of getting specialized like that, though, because they may be working for, say, a SaaS startup where they have to hire everything from sales and marketing to sales engineering to customer success to security engineering to CISO to marketing executive. It's impossible almost for them to develop a specialty in any of these areas. I think it becomes more possible once you've gotten to a certain company size, or, like you said, if you're a consulting firm and you're hiring the same type of people all the time. Like, that's how I got my start in the industry, was working for a consulting firm.
Yeah. And too, with all of that, I would say one recommendation would be to reach out to, Pete, and ask you to help someone, hire, because that's something too, where, folks like yourself are, I feel like, really critical to organizations like LBMC when we're trying to hire specific staff to fill a specific role. A lot of times, you reach out to some external recruiters and they can give you, here's the 5 resumes that you need to be looking at. So I think that can also be really beneficial.
Yeah, and it helps too, I think, just as an external recruiter, and appreciate the shout out there. But I think it helps as an external recruiter because we are working with so many different clients in the industry that we may have access to more roles, more types of companies. Thus, we're talking to more candidates than internal recruiters. I think sometimes you kind of get stuck in your bubble if you're recruiting for the same position all the time, for the same company all the time. And I noticed this when I was an internal recruiter. It felt like I had exhausted the market after a couple of years, and I wasn't sure what new people I could find. But being on the outside like that, again, different perspective that you bring to the relationship. But yeah, we're actually coming up on time here, Kyle, believe it or not. So just got to ask you my one last question. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Outside of what we talked through, I feel like, well, maybe to refocus back a little bit, I think the big thing is, while the talent gap is real, I think that a little bit the perspective gap is greater. And so understanding that and looking at understanding your own biases and perspectives on what you're trying to, who you're trying to hire. And on the flip side, as an employee, what you're trying to get into and what your real perspective should be to do that. I feel like that's, as big or bigger than the talent gap itself, is just, lack of perspective of what entry-level roles should be on both sides of the board. People come out of school, they want to be, a manager, and people want to hire someone into an entry-level role that is a staff person. And so, all of that happens. And I think that is a big part of it.
Yeah. A previous guest I talked to called it the expectation gap. I
would go with that. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So you have people with one set of expectations on one side of the hiring equation, people with another set of expectations on the other side, and nobody's really talking to each other. They're not adjusting expectations. They just keep butting heads coming after the problem from different perspectives, and never the twain shall meet. So that's a great point, Kyle. Well, people want to keep up with the work that you do or reach out to you. What's the best way to do so?
Probably the easiest way is just find me on LinkedIn, Kyle Hinterberg. Just search me. I should be there.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, appreciate your time, Kyle. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.